All right, so I've got notes. We'll do our R&D. We'll do their R&D, how they're different. You guys are pros. You can handle this.
What are we doing? I thought you were
You're just doing the
that.
intro.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the MC Podcast. Very special episode today. I'm Andrew Crabtree, your host, and I am joined by my dad, Master's Choice President Lyn Crabtree, and Dr. David Orr. Did I say that right, Orr?
You said it right.
I think I've heard it a few different ways, and I've never heard you correct anybody yet.
I've said it a few different ways, but you said it just right.
All right.
David Orr.
David Orr. David works in R&D at Master's Choice, and so we're going to talk about kind of all things related to that R&D cycle, hybrid development. That should be fun.
Yeah, talking about hybrids.
Yeah, that's your thing, huh?
Right.
So before we get into the fun stuff, what's your background? Where are you from? How long you been doing this? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that could be a long story. I'll give you the short version
Fair enough.
of it. I've been worked in corn breeding. Started in 1986. Was my first job in corn breeding.
The year I was born.
And yeah, there you go. And have worked in that and also in agronomy since then for several different companies.
What drew you to it? What made you decide you wanted to spend the 33 years dedicated to corn plants?
I think the thing that really is appealing about it is that there's a magic in corn breeding that you can't quite explain. So there's a lot of science to it, and they say it's a science and an art. But I think there's an element of magic when you get the right combination that you just can't quite explain. It's like these two lines wanted to get together, and when they did, it was something magic that happened for the kind of performance that you see.
That's pretty cool.
That's what's always fun to try to figure out. It's like, when's that magic going to happen?
How many times in your career can you, off the top of your head, just ballpark, like how many times have you really seen something where it happened and it was like, whoa, that's special?
It happens every year.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So sometimes, every year I'm out and it's like, oh man, this hybrid is going to be it. And then you see it another place, or you see the data and you're like, well, I missed that one. It looked really great at that location. But it's very rare. You really have to look at thousands of hybrids before you find one that just has that special combination that really can perform.
Well, that's pretty cool. All right, LC, Dad, Lyn, El Presidente.
Hi, Andrew.
What's it? So David, Dr. David, you've been here for
A little over a year.
What have you seen out of our R&D program since he's been around, and what's that been like working with him?
It's an absolute, not just because he's sitting there,
Yeah.
and I really think a lot of this man. I think a lot of this man's character, his love for the Lord. I think a lot of this man, because of his dedication to our craft. But this guy here, he's the first to get there. He's the last one to leave, and I mean, 10, 11 o'clock at night a lot of times. And his appreciation for the job and for the people that he works with. We have a very young, he has a very young team, and a largely inexperienced team in a lot of ways. And he is a master teacher. He spends time with them. They absolutely adore him, and they just get the best of what they're trying to do each and every day. And that's just absolutely a joy to watch and to be a part of.
I echo all of that, but maybe for your sake, maybe we get him on camera talking about you more often. That was a glowing.
That is. I feel great. It's just like,
well, let's take the good vibes and start talking about R&D cycle, hybrid development. Start with you, LC. We've had Master's Choice here for 15 years. What has been your focus, the things that we have wanted to pursue? Like, what would you say the stated goal of the Master's Choice R&D program is? What are the things that are at the core of our R&D program?
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, my background, my experience is in livestock consulting. I was a ruminant nutritionist, and finding being involved in developing a corn company may almost sound contrary to that, but when we found a corn that was making a significant difference when we were working with cows and balancing feed rations, it was more of a natural move than what you might assume. So our focus has always been developing corn materials that make a difference, and because we found one that was different back in 2001, it made that decision easier, because if they could be different, then we could even make that better. And so that's always been our driving force. Let's cater to livestock feed, whether that be silage or digestible grain, and let's make the best livestock feed we can make, because in reality we're not getting that done very well today in the industry.
So speaking of, trying to make, Dr. David, in the industry, there are different hybrids for different purposes. Mm-hmm. On the whole, what do you see are the biggest differences between where we are trying to take the Master's Choice program and what might be the goal of the industry at large right now?
You say there's different hybrids for different purposes, but 99% of the grain goes for one purpose, and it's developed for the grain industry, is the way I see it. And I was thinking about, how do you put that? The phrase that comes to mind is, we are cutting against the grain. We are developing products that are very different looking than your typical grain hybrid that has hard grain, fast dry down, requires high populations. We're looking for things really that would appeal to livestock, and that's a very different look in a hybrid than what a grain hybrid would be.
And what are those things, maybe that we're seeing, or that we're at least trying to express in our hybrids in our research? What are those things that are better suited for that silage or that livestock industry?
Yeah, so the things that are the same are, we're looking for high grain yield, and we're looking for good agronomics. Beyond that, they start to diverge. What we're looking for a highly digestible grain. Typically, that's a softer grain. And we're not looking for something that dries down fast in the field. We're looking for something that has a wider harvest window. And we're also looking for things that have more digestible stalks. And Lyn can kind of dive into that from the nutrition standpoint, but things also that perform better at lower populations.
So these differences, and you kind of mentioned the things that the industry are really pushing towards, being that faster dry down, the higher test weight, sustainability for the stock when you're increasing populations. Has that always been the focus of the industry, or historically, if we look back at the beginning of your career, even before that, has that been something that's been a long-standing trend, or is that something that's more recent?
I think it's been a long-standing trend. I mean, you've seen populations rise, you've seen test weight rise, and you've seen agronomic improvements, which are all positive things for a grain farmer. Those things over time have been a pretty long-term trend line.
What do suggested planting populations look like today versus maybe when you started your career?
When I started, there were a lot of guys that were planting in the low 20s.
Yeah.
And now, it's 30 to 40 and even higher.
Yeah.
30 would be a very low population right now, unless you're in just a really dry area. 30 would be on the low end, probably right now.
On a 30-inch row.
On a 30-inch row. And then it goes on up from there, up into the mid-40s in some cases.
When I started farming, Andrew, it was on a 40-inch row, and we were planting 15 to 18,000.
Yep.
And
that was pretty common.
Big difference.
Yeah.
And so as you see, as the industry has ramped up from then to now, what has that done to the digestibility, the feeding quality of those products?
Well, I think that's one thing that we know from our experience that probably most people don't necessarily know, that if you can get a deeper kernel, if you can get a denser, thicker stalk, you can increase digestibility. And so you're really looking at lower pops with high flex corn hybrids that'll go ahead and fill in when you give them the space to be able to do so. The digestibility goes up, and it's a significant movement. So when you move from, if you're on a 30-inch row and you move from 28, 30,000 to 34, 36,000, you decrease digestibility considerably. It's a large percentage. So that probably has been one of the bigger things that has been shocking to the industry. I don't think that as we talk about test weight, as we talk about kernel texture, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. They used to say if you just grind it fine enough, that you would bring that out of it and make it more digestible. People know that's not true. They know that they're just these smaller pieces in the manure at the end of the day. And so it's not that
if you grind a rock, it's still a rock. Is that what?
Yeah, and it's not that doesn't help a little, but it's not a solution. And so when we're talking about floury, softer endo, more digestible grain, people understand that, but they don't necessarily understand that planting at 30,000 versus 36,000 also increases the digestibility of that grain, as long as it's not a fixed-ear corn hybrid, David, and as long as it's got the ability to flex somewhat and make up that distance.
One of the other things that people don't understand about test weight is that test weight's a function of kernel texture, so how dense is that kernel, but also kernel size. Mm-hmm. And the smaller the kernel, the more of them you can pack into that bushel, so you get a higher test weight. Mm-hmm. So you've got two things. You've got a hard kernel, and you've got a smaller, more compact kernel, both of which run against what's better for livestock.
Correct.
Maybe, I think you guys kind of, you touched on flex just a little bit, and maybe Dr. David, from your perspective of, what you've seen in your years around plants and genetics, maybe speak to a guy that would be worried. Just conventional wisdom, it seems logical. You plant more plants, you get more yield. Maybe what does it look like when that plant flexes from a yield perspective, and how close can we get with that flex to matching a silage and a grain yield?
I think you're looking at quality versus quantity. If you were looking at just pure quantity of grain on good ground, higher populations gives you a higher quantity of grain. If you're looking at quality of silage, then that higher population, as Lyn said, may not get you where you want to go. Mm-hmm. So are you growing it for grain? If you are, the hybrids are developed for high population. They're going to perform very well at those high populations for grain. If you're looking for silage, that may not be the case, because you're going to decrease the quality and not really increase the yield of the silage very much.
The thing that we're doing today is a lot of the creativeness in plant breeding is really pushing plant pops. It wasn't that long ago that 40,000 was just an unheard of number. 40,000 is a common number now, but we're hearing 50, 60, 70, 80,000 kernels, per acre.
Does that look like grass growing at 80,000 kernels? Does that look like grass? I can't even visualize that.
Well, we have to understand that we're all trying to chase the same dream. You want to match the corn hybrid's ability to maximize the space around it, the density of that acre. Mm-hmm. So we've got a square acre out there, and the ideal is to match the ear size to the density there, so that we've got the maximum potential within that corn hybrid at the maximum population to take advantage of the density in the field. So we're all chasing the same goal. It's just that we're chasing it with a lower population. We're trying to maximize that yield. We're trying to match the yield that they're getting at 40 or 50,000 bushels at 30,000. We're still trying to catch that, and still trying to make that match with the plant's ability to maximize the density at a lower population, because it's just absolutely critical that we do so for the digestibility differences that show up in that grain. It just, that part of the equation is not hard for any farmer to understand. You picture an ear of popcorn, that looks like a fixed ear of corn anymore, And we all know how, if you put a kernel of popcorn in your mouth and you chomp down on it, you better protect your investment in your teeth, because it's going to be pretty darn hard. So we can see that. Whereas, when I first started farming, David, back, a few years ago, and at 15,000 population, we had a pound ear of corn.
Yeah.
Those ears were big old honking ears. You don't see that anymore. That's nearly a thing of the past. But the theory's the same. Breeding's the same. We got to match the population to the density to the acre to maximize that growth. So you could plant a fixed ear at 30,000, or even a semi-fixed ear at 30,000, and if it doesn't flex to meet the potential of that acre of ground, then you're going to come up short on yield.
Right.
So you got to build that. You got to build that plant differently, than the corn plants that are being built today.
The other thing that comes to mind, Lynn, with that, and you and I haven't talked about this, but when you drop the population, you decrease the stress on that corn plant.
Yeah.
And if you're a grain farmer, maximizing that grain yield is all important. If you're feeding livestock, you have to have product to feed the livestock. If you don't, it's a bad day. And if you plant a real high population, and then you get a drought at the wrong time, and you start blanking out, that feed value goes down tremendously. And I think by dropping the population, you give some stability to the performance. If you hit a drought, that plant is going to take it better than if you've got that population 10,000 plants higher.
What's it doing? That plant's stressed a little bit too, David, for some disease pressure, some additional disease pressure at those higher pops.
And you don't lose tonnage so much as you lose grain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't have a good transition here, so we'll just switch gears here. Everything you guys just went through was really good. So one of the things I've noticed working in the industry is it does not seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there does not seem to be a great deal of independent seed companies that have their own genetics, their own hybrid development, R&D programs. Is that generally correct?
There are fewer R&D programs now than there were 20 years ago, and that has also been a long-term trend. Everyone's seen consolidation in the seed industry, and there's fewer research programs than there were all those.
So why do you see fewer independent companies with their own programs?
A lot of it's the consolidation in the industry. I mean, a lot of the smaller companies have been purchased by the larger companies, and the ones that are left, it takes a lot of money to invest in R&D, and the ones that are left, it's difficult to make that R&D investment to be competitive in genetics.
Is it a good thing for our industry to see more R&D programs, or is it a good thing to continue the consolidation, generally speaking?
Yeah, you're opening a pretty good sized can of worms there. Is it a good thing?
I'm not sure you liked my question.
I wouldn't phrase it in good or bad. I'd say it's business and it's the industry. But what you do see is consolidation. When you see that, you see less choices, perhaps, for customers. I mean, in the old days, you did have companies that went off in different directions with their hybrids and what they did, and you had more choices. And now you tend to have hybrids that they tend to look and feel and do kind of similar things. You don't have those different trails that you can take with your genetic program. And I think having smaller companies that have research efforts and are developing new genetics I think it adds in diversity, and diversity just means choices for customers. It adds in choices, and I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Did I walk that line all right?
That's really what I wanted out of that. I wasn't trying to set up any kind of political, we're going to talk about them or make them look bad.
Yeah.
In my mind, when you look at what's available, I think the path that we're pursuing is the absolute right path for livestock, but there's so few that are doing what we're doing. It seems like all the R&D programs that I know of are all kind of really trying to hit the same goals and try to out test weight each other, out yield each other. And if we're right, which I think we are, then there's just not that many other companies that you're going to see do that. Or if you do, it just takes a really big ships are really hard to turn, right? So
you're seeing the big companies that are really doing a great job with research for what they're doing, developing grain hybrids. And there's just a few big companies doing that. And then you see some small independent programs, and I guess we would be a small independent program. And you see some of those where people are really working hard to bring some different genetics to the market. And our take on that is to develop products, as Lyn says, for the end user, for that livestock. And there's not many people doing that.
There just really isn't. And what we're looking at is that the corn hybrids that are developed for animal feed are just kind of pulling off the best of this focus. So the focus is still on developing great yield in the field with very little consideration for anything else other than some agronomics. We want to make sure it stands, and we want to have some disease resistance in that plant, and so that's the focus. So what you do is if you're looking for animal feed, you're just trying to pull the best of this focus, which really isn't going in the right direction. And I know that you and I have talked about this several times. It's difficult to say that all of our competition is and all of our other folks that are working to develop corn in R&D are going in one direction. It's almost like we're going in the polar opposite.
It is.
You know, there's some consistencies in what we're doing. We still want a corn plant that stands up and still yields and makes grain. We still want the same types of disease resistance as what everybody else is looking for, but we are moving in a completely different direction. And the thing that's unique about this, and the reason that we are so committed to our R&D and to the excellence of our R&D, is as they continue to get better pursuing those things, you know, that we're talking about, high test weight, high populations, you know, and we're looking at pursuing lower populations. We're looking at softer grain. You know, we're looking at that disparity gets wider year after year. They get better at what they're chasing. We're chasing the polar opposite. We get better at what we're chasing. And every year, the difference between selecting the best of what's going in this direction versus what we're trying to do just gets greater. That chasm just continues to deepen.
Yeah, I think we've got a pretty cool graphic that one of the guys in the office put together that if you are on Instagram, go to our Instagram, Master's Choice Instagram, and we'll put that graphic up. But you're right. I think that I kind of said that big ships are hard to turn, and big R&D programs are even probably harder because you're talking about a cycle to develop hybrids. That's how long, David? I mean, how long would it take to turn something around?
It's probably 10 years for most companies.
Yeah. This has been great. Just a couple little questions here before we wrap up. When this is going to air here in early half of June, what does R&D at Master's Choice look like right now? I know we just released a video that's showing the nursery being planted. Maybe how did that go, and what's currently active in the MC R&D?
Yeah, no, the nursery went well. So we just finished planting our nursery yesterday.
It's exciting.
And so that is good. And today I told the guys, I said, go out there. I want you to fill in any gaps between the blocks. I want you to fill that in with just regular conventional field corn, Master's Choice corn. And I said, that's for the birds, because right now they've got birds coming in and trying to peck seeds out of the ground. And I said, we want to make sure they have plenty to eat. That is not our research program.
Fair.
And so that's what they're doing right now.
Very cool. What's next for MC R&D? What's the next thing that you're excited about?
I'm excited this year about the early genetics that we're developing, and we've been working on that for several years, the researchers here, and we have some things that we're testing quite a bit further north than we have before. Good. And hoping for some good things to come out of that.
Well, that's going to be welcome news to our audience in the north.
The things that he was excited about 5 years ago are just now, our audience is getting a chance to just now begin to get to see.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys for coming on. This was fun. Any parting thoughts? Any parting words?
Nursery looks good. Our team's doing a great job, and looking forward to another good year.
Well, thank you, podcast audience, for joining us. We had a good talk about R&D today. Any questions that you would have, hit us up. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or if you're listening to this audio podcast, leave us a review and feel free to submit those questions, and we'll answer them the best we can. I won't try to answer it. I'll pass it along to these guys because they know infinitely more than me. And so thanks for checking this out, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, podcast.